Madam President. Thank you for the recognition. I've been listening intently to the conversation around the room about the bill that is before us. And for those listening, it's a bill that is entitled An Act Requiring the Provision of All-Terrain Wheelchairs at State Parks. And it's a relatively short bill that would require the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to select 5 state parks within our state and provide them with 2 each battery-powered all-terrain wheelchairs that will be made available to the public. And there's some other language in here about how the Commissioner of Energy and Environmental Protection will establish rules for the hours of availability and how they will be utilized and stored and so forth. And they will also produce a report back to the General Assembly regarding how this program is going at some point in the future. I think it's January 2025. So let me start by saying that, when I see a bill like this, I'm immediately sympathetic, obviously, to the desire behind something like this to provide additional opportunities for the residents of the state, and certainly for people that are in the position of needing to have a wheelchair at a state park. And in this case, we're talking about a very specific type of wheelchair, which I don't know that, despite all the many questions that were asked and answered or not answered, that we've really got to the bottom of that. I don't think people really realize what they're referring to when they're talking about all-terrain wheelchairs, in my opinion, just because I've done a little research myself to find out exactly what these things are and what they look like and who they're for and that type of thing. The second reaction I have, though, after my immediate desire to support a policy like this, which is clearly beneficial, and I'll tell you, when you come to the legislature, generally speaking, the bills that we're offering, they all sound good. We don't do things that say we're going to create hardships for people. We only say we're going to offer additional benefits, additional insurance coverage, additional health benefits, additional payments for different types of services, and in this case, an additional opportunity for activity at our state parks. And all of those things are good. But it seems like there are very few people that in the midst of their debate and conversation and advocacy for these bills ever talk about the other side of the equation, which is that every one of these things that the state provides has to come from somewhere else. And it's very difficult for me in particular because I've kind of become the voice of the someone else in this chamber on many, many occasions who is willing to stand up and point out what is truly obvious. And I will channel my inner Milton Friedman and say there's no free lunch. The fact of the matter is that whenever you are going to provide something like this, it costs money. And that money does not grow on trees. It doesn't come from anywhere. Even if the federal government is printing it for our benefit, it still comes from our neighbors. And it comes from them by force. They don't have any choice. When this body and the federal government passes a budget and develops a tax structure, our constituents, the people that we represent, have to pay that tax. They don't have any choice. And the penalty for failing to do so can be severe. In each one of our districts, I want to remind my colleagues that there are people that are going hungry. In every one of our districts, I want to remind my colleagues that there are people that are contemplating closing their businesses. There are people contemplating moving to another state. And in fact, many people are moving away. I'm sure everybody in this room has a friend or a family member that has moved to another state, South Carolina, Texas, etc. And the reason they will cite is that this state government taxes too much and therefore spends too much, and it's becoming difficult to survive in that environment. I have constituents, seniors in particular, who are on fixed incomes, who are left with very little choice on whether or not they can remain in their homes in Connecticut because they are paying so much in the way of property taxes and other types of sales taxes combined with inflation and the cost of all of their daily goods, from milk and bread and eggs to everything, that they're really, really struggling. And when we have ideas that come before this chamber, and of course, as I mentioned from the outset, very, very good sounding ideas. Yes, why wouldn't we want to put all-terrain wheelchairs at the state parks? Of course we would. But we have to remember that this is going to cost money. And in fact, I've heard in the discussion today that these all-terrain wheelchairs go for $25,000 a piece. And this is just the start, Madam President. This is us doing all-terrain wheelchairs at 5 parks, 2 each. That means 10 of these items. So you're talking a cost of $250,000 simply for the wheelchairs, but there are going to be other costs associated with them. They're battery-powered wheelchairs. They're going to need maintenance. Someone's going to need to charge them. They're going to have parts replaced if they're going to be heavily used at our parks. You're going to need to provide helmets. I don't know if you need to provide supervision. I don't know the answer to any of these questions. And none of it is in the bill, which I guess I would say is probably my number one concern about the policy that is before us, which is that of all the questions asked, I've heard very little answers about the exact type and use of the wheelchairs and how they will be paid for exactly. I have some questions. I think we'll start with the wheelchairs themselves. I think that's a great place to start. Through you, Madam President, I heard folks say that these are potentially going to be electric vehicles, but they weren't certain. But I'm reading the bill, and it says on line 32 and 33 that these are specifically battery-powered wheelchairs. So I'd like to confirm with the chairman that we are only talking about electric vehicles. We are not talking about all-terrain wheelchairs that are powered by one's limbs. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe he is correct.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Does this bill contemplate, or does the chairman have any idea how these battery-powered wheelchairs will be maintained, recharged, or stored? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe the language says the agency will come up with a plan on how to handle all those aspects of using the chairs.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And will those aspects also require additional money to pay for them? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. The language also stipulates that all other maintenance, et cetera, will be handled with funds already in the agency.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you. And I asked about helmets and safety gear. Is that provided for in the bill? Through you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, rather.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, that is not prescribed in the language of the bill.
Senator Sampson.
Do you know, through you, Mr. President, whether or not these ATV wheelchairs have wheels, or are these the type of vehicles that actually have tracks, like a tank? Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Although that question kind of brings up images of like hovercraft and everything in my head, no, it is not prescribed in the language of the bill.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I appreciate that answer. I've been doing some research. I just Googled ATV wheelchairs. I found half a dozen companies that make them around the country, and they almost exclusively have tracks. They're kind of wild-looking and cool implements. I think there's a lot of folks that might not fall into the category of disabled who would be inclined to even want to try them, including me. Let me just ask another question. I mean, are these exclusively going to be set aside for the use for any particular group of people? Must one be disabled? Must one meet an age requirement or an age a minimum or maximum age requirement? Through you?
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules for use will be prescribed by the agency.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate that answer. The bill came from somewhere. I heard Senator Austin suggested that she was an advocate for this policy. Did she make any indication who the intended end user might be?
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not to my knowledge.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate that answer. Yeah, see, these are the things that are, for me, are very hard to justify this expenditure. If there was a plan placed in front of me that said, look, we have this situation where we have some disabled veterans, there's folks in our community, they've expressed a desire to be able to participate in these types of activities, they have limited funds, there are no existing nonprofit or charity organizations that are helping in this arena. This is something that the state has a compelling interest in being involved in. Then I'm all ears. I'm right here going, okay, let me figure out how we can facilitate this. But I think what we have here is we have someone's back of a napkin idea that's never been fleshed out more than the 3 seconds they took to write it down. And it's here in front of us about to become a law that will cost the taxpayers of Connecticut $500,000. And that's frustrating for me because we are stewards of the taxpayers' money. That is our job here. We're supposed to be looking out for our constituents. And sure, this bill looks out for the people that might want to use these all-terrain wheelchairs, and I want to look out for them too. But I also want to look out for the other people that are never, ever going to come in contact with one of these things that are going to be paying for it. And I don't feel like they've been represented at all in this conversation, and I don't think they were considered when the bill was written. I still don't think they're being considered in any way. Those people are irrelevant. They are nothing more than the funding source for whatever items the people in this room want to put out there to take credit for expanding government and the services we provide. We have a greater responsibility than that. Through you, Mr. President,
Senator Sampson.
I heard conflicting information about whether this is funded via the budget at $250,000, at $500,000, whether the bill sets aside the money, whether or not it's in the proposed budget. I don't know what someone would mean when they say it's in the budget, because there is no budget yet. There's a budget that is being negotiated. I don't know if this is in the governor's proposal. I don't know if it's in the Democrats' proposal. I don't know if it's in the minority proposals that are being considered. So I don't know what it means to say it's in the budget. Let me just ask one simple question. Is this bill authorizing this expenditure? Through you,
Senator
Mr. President.
Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a good question for clarity. This bill authorizes the purchase of these items. If the money gets put in the budget, they will be purchased through this bill if it becomes law. If the money is not put in the budget, they will not.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. President. Is there language in this bill that says that these mandates on the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection are not going to be required of them if the money is not provided? Because I'm reading it to say the DEP shall select 5 state parks. The DEP shall host 2 such all-terrain vehicles. They shall be made available. I don't see anything that says that the money has to be provided. And for me, that means that if this money is not in the final budget, that means that ultimately DEP is going to have to do this, and they will certainly be taking that money from some other thing that they have discretion over, because they'll have no choice, because they've got to comply with this language. Am I missing something through you, Mr. President?
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, I understand your reading of that, but in practice, that is the way I described it is how it works.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that answer. So if we put something into law requiring a state agency to shall engage in a certain activity, they are not required to do it unless the money is there provided to them for that specific purpose. Is that correct through you?
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. In this situation, that is how I understand it.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And that may be the case. I think it would be surprising if this bill becomes law and the DEP does not go ahead and follow the protocol that is in this bill. And I guess I have a concern that if they've got to spend $250,000 or $500,000, $500,000, Madam President, on these all-terrain wheelchairs just for a pilot of 10 units, that means that the DEP's budget, effectively for all the other things that they have to provide for, is diminished by the same amount. And that concerns me greatly. And it's another illustration, I think, of when I say that I don't believe this was well considered. Let me ask some actually far more important than this conversation, basic questions about this policy, which is, are these all-terrain wheelchairs lawful for use at state parks now? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. I do not have an answer for that.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm going to bet the answer is no. I'm going to bet that if I actually showed up at any state park in Connecticut with an all-terrain wheelchair and I began using it, I would be confronted by authorities suggesting that you cannot use an ATV, particularly an electric-powered one, on our park trails and beaches and so forth. So to me, that's a concern right off the bat, that I don't know that that was even taken into consideration here. And let me ask this question. Are any other types of all-terrain vehicles, gasoline or electric-powered, able to be used in our state parks? Through you.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. As that doesn't pertain to the language in this bill, I don't have an answer for that.
Senator Sampson.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I do have an answer for that, and the answer is no. And it's something that I have worked on for years in this place, that the state of Connecticut continues to charge off-road vehicle registrations for people that own off-road motorcycles and ATVs, and yet, despite the fact that they still sell these plates and people still pay the fee, and there has been a policy in place for, I don't know, going on 15 years, suggesting that the DEP has to develop a program for ATVs use in the state, they never have. I put a bill in every year, and it goes nowhere to actually set aside state property for the use of people who want to use ATVs that they've paid good money for, and parks that are owned by all of us. So that is a concern that I have as far as that goes, that I don't know that this activity is even lawful, and I don't think that's addressed in the bill. And let me ask this question. If this bill passes and this becomes a law, will other folks going to the park be able to use their own similar type of ATV wheelchairs at those parks? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. That isn't addressed in this bill, so I do not have an answer for that.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate that answer. Doesn't anyone else in the room think that that's important? That we really should have figured out whether or not we are going to say only that at these very specific places and only with the approval of the reservation at the DEP that you can use a state-supplied motorized ATV, and that other folks may be restricted from being able to use theirs for a similar activity? I'm willing to bet that that's the current policy. I'm also willing to bet, Madam President, that unless we do something otherwise today, right here, that will be the policy that DEP comes up with. They're going to tell you, when they write their rules and regs, that you are only able to use the ones that the state provides. I'm going to be willing to bet anything that that's how it goes, and that other people who are paying for their own ATV wheelchairs will not be able to use them in our state parks. I'm quite certain. And as a matter of fact, Madam President, because this concerns me so greatly, I want to offer an amendment. The clerk should be in possession of this amendment. It is LCO 8597. I ask that it be called, and I be given the opportunity to summarize it.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 8597, Senate Amendment A.
Senator Sampson, please do summarize.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is a very simple one-sentence amendment. It says, notwithstanding any provision of the general statutes, no state park shall restrict the use of any all-terrain wheelchair. So this will help allow people that are actually using their own dollars to purchase an all-terrain wheelchair to be able to enjoy all of the great experiences that were described by the number of my colleagues who got up and talked about how great this was. I agree. But right now, I don't think people are allowed to do this at all. And I would like to see whether this bill becomes law and whether or not it's funded and whether or not there is ultimately 10 paid for by state taxpayers ATV wheelchairs in existence, that people can still have this activity. I move adoption of the amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to support it, and I'd like a roll call vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. The amendment is consistent with the good senator's beliefs, but in light of that, and especially in light of the fact that it strikes everything else in the bill and inserts a sentence, I would have to deem this an unfriendly amendment and urge my colleagues to vote against it.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? Senator Harding, is that you would like to remark on the amendment?
Amendment A, Senate Bill 301, total number voting 36, total voting yea 12, total voting nay 24, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Will you remark further on the bill? Will you remark further on the bill? If not, I will open the voting machine, and Mr. Clerk, please announce the roll call vote.
Mini roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on the bill, Senate Bill 301, an act requiring the provision of